I found my front porch stripped bare on a Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, and immediately knew something was very wrong. The rubber weather ceiling I had carefully stacked beside my garage door the night before was completely gone. Not just moved, not scattered by wind, but vanished. I stood there in my shorts and t-shirt, coffee mug in hand, staring at the empty concrete where 6 boxes of premium silicone weather stripping had been sitting just 8 hours earlier. My name is Harold Reeves, and I had spent $400 on those materials to finally seal up my house properly before the summer heat became unbearable. I walked around my property twice, checking behind bushes and around the side gate, thinking maybe someone had moved them as a prank. Nothing. The boxes were industrial packaging, heavy and awkward, not something that would blow away in the night. Phoenix had been calm anyway, barely a breeze. Someone had deliberately taken my stuff. My neighbor Tom was watering his desert landscaping when I walked over. He looked up from his cactus garden and immediately caught my expression. "You okay, Harry?" he asked, turning down the hose. "Did you see anyone near my place last night or this morning? Someone took the weather sealing materials I bought yesterday." Tom frowned, thinking. "I saw Deborah driving around pretty early this morning in her golf cart. Maybe 6:30. She had some boxes in the back, but I didn't think much of it. You know how she is about her HOA rounds. Deborah Patterson. Our HOA president and the single most irritating person I had encountered in my 42 years of life. She was 53, with that specific haircut that seemed to come standard with middle-aged women who loved wielding tiny amounts of power. Her entire existence revolved around finding violations in our neighborhood and sending threatening letters on official HOA letterhead. "What kind of boxes?" I asked, feeling my jaw tighten. "Cardboard, kind of long. Could have been what you bought, honestly." They were stacked in the back of her cart. I pulled out my phone and checked my Ring doorbell footage. The camera had a decent view of my front porch and driveway. I scrolled back to around 6 in the morning, and there she was, clear as day. Deborah Patterson, in her typical khaki caprice and floral blouse, loading my weather-sealing materials into her golf cart. She worked quickly, glancing around like she knew exactly what she was doing. The timestamp reads 6:47 a.m. That absolute, I stopped myself, showing Tom the footage. He whistled low. "Man, that's bold even for her. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get my stuff back." I walked directly to Deborah's house, 3 streets over in our subdivision. The Desert Vista Homeowners Association covered about 200 homes, all built in the same southwestern style with tile roofs and stucco walls. Deborah's house was the most aggressively maintained property in the neighborhood, with a manicured lawn that must have cost a fortune in water bills and flowers that seemed to bloom year-round through sheer force of her will. I rang the doorbell 4 times before she answered. She opened the door wearing rubber gloves and holding a spray bottle of cleaner, her expression shifting from annoyed to fake pleasant when she saw me. "Harold, good morning. What can I do for you?" Her voice had that sing-song quality that immediately set my teeth on edge. "You can return my property, Deborah. The weather-sealing materials you took from my porch this morning." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile stayed fixed. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't been near your house today." "Really?" "Because my doorbell camera has clear footage of you loading boxes into your golf cart at 6:47 this morning." "My boxes?" A flash of something crossed her face, maybe surprise or anger, but she recovered quickly. "Those materials were in violation of HOA Code Section 12.3. Nothing can be stored visible from the street for more than 24 hours. I confiscated them as president. You can file an appeal if you want them back." I had read our HOA guidelines when I moved in 3 years ago. The rule says 48 hours, not 24. And even if it was 24, you don't have the right to just take people's property. That's called theft. It's called enforcement, she said, her voice going cold. And those materials are now HOA property until your violation is resolved. You'll receive a formal letter in 3 to 5 business days explaining the appeals process. Where are my materials right now? That's not your concern. It absolutely is my concern. I paid for them. I have the receipt and they're mine. If you don't return them right now, I'm calling the police. Deborah laughed, actually laughed in my face. Go ahead. The police won't do anything. This is a civil HOA matter and I'm well within my rights. Maybe next time you'll think twice before violating community standards. She closed the door before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, working to control my temper. I had dealt with difficult people before, but Deborah was something special. She had turned HOA governance into her personal fiefdom, and apparently felt comfortable stealing from residents to maintain her authority. I called the Phoenix Police non-emergency line from her driveway. The dispatcher was professional but not particularly encouraging. So this is an HOA dispute. She asked after I explained the situation. It's theft. She took $400 worth of materials from my property without permission. Do you have proof of ownership? Yes, I have the receipt from Home Depot. I bought everything yesterday afternoon. And you have video of her taking the items, clear footage from my Ring camera. There was a pause. Okay, we can send an officer out to take a report. What's the address? I gave Deborah's address and waited on the sidewalk. It took about 20 minutes for a patrol car to arrive. The officer who got out was young, maybe late 20s, with a nameplate that read Officer Sanchez. He listened to my story, watched the Ring footage on my phone, and examined the receipt I had pulled up in my email. That's pretty straightforward, he said. She clearly took your property. Let me talk to her. Deborah answered the door much faster this time. Her demeanor changed completely when she saw the officer, becoming almost deferential. Good morning, officer. How can I help you? Madam, I need to ask you about some weather sealing materials that were taken from this gentleman's property this morning. Do you have those items? Those materials were confiscated due to an HOA violation, she said smoothly. This is a civil matter between the homeowner and the association. I'm the president, and I was acting in my official capacity. Officer Sanchez looked at his notepad. Madam, do you have any documentation showing that your HOA allows you to take property from residents? It's in our bylaws. Section 12.3 allows for removal of items that violate community standards. Can I see that documentation? Deborah disappeared inside for a few minutes and returned with a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. Officer Sanchez read through the relevant section carefully. Madam, this section talks about notifying homeowners of violations and assessing fines. I don't see anything here that gives you the right to physically remove property from someone's home. It's implied, Deborah insisted. How else would we enforce the rules? You could start by actually following them, I said. The storage time limit is 48 hours, not 24, and the stuff hadn't even been there for a full day. Officer Sanchez looked at me, then back at Deborah. Madam, I'm going to need you to return Mr. Reeves' property. He has proof of purchase and video evidence of you taking the items. If you don't return them voluntarily, I'll have to write this up as a theft report. Deborah's face went red. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to maintain property values for everyone in this community. If people can just leave whatever they want on their porches, the whole neighborhood goes downhill. That may be true, Officer Sanchez said patiently, But you can't take someone's property without their permission. That's the law. Fine, Deborah spat. Follow me. She led us through her pristine house to her garage. My weather sealing materials were stacked neatly in the corner, the boxes still sealed. But they weren't alone. The garage was full of items, clearly labeled with addresses written in black marker. Garden hoses, potted plants, a welcome mat, even a kid's bicycle. All confiscated apparently from various residents. Holy! Officer Sanchez stopped himself. Madam, you have a lot of property here that doesn't belong to you. It all belongs to people who violated HOA rules, Deborah said defensively. They can have it back once they pay their fines and submit proper appeals. That's not how this works, Officer Sanchez said, pulling out his radio. I'm going to need a supervisor here. The situation escalated quickly after that. A sergeant arrived, took one look at Deborah's garage, and called for additional units. Apparently, what Deborah had been doing constituted multiple counts of theft. The fact that she was HOA president didn't give her any legal authority to confiscate property, regardless of what she thought the bylaws meant. I spent the next 3 hours giving statements and helping identify my materials. Other officers went door to door in the neighborhood, trying to find the owners of the various items in Deborah's garage. It turned out she had been doing this for months, taking things from people's properties and holding them hostage until residents paid fines or gave up and bought replacements. My neighbor Tom showed up around noon, having heard through the neighborhood grapevine what was happening. Is it true? Deborah got arrested. Not arrested yet, but it's looking that way, I said, watching as officers photographed and cataloged everything in her garage. She's been stealing from people all over the subdivision. I knew she was intense, but this is crazy. My son's bike disappeared last month. We thought some kids took it. Check with the officers, it might be in there. It was. Tom's son's bike was among the confiscated items, taken because it had been left in their driveway overnight. Deborah had marked it as an HOA violation and simply took it. She had sent Tom a letter saying he would be fined unless the bike was properly stored, but never mentioned that she had the bike herself. As more neighbors arrived and more stolen property was identified, the scope of Deborah's operation became clear. She had taken items from at least 30 different households, ranging in value from a $15 doormat to someone's $600 pressure washer. The total value was easily over $5,000. Deborah was placed in handcuffs around 2 in the afternoon. She protested loudly, insisting that everything she did was for the good of the community and that we were all ungrateful. The sergeant informed her that she was being charged with multiple counts of theft and that she needed to remain silent and speak with an attorney. I finally got my weather sealing materials back around 3. An officer helped me load them into my truck and apologized for the hassle. This is one of the stranger cases I've worked, he admitted. Usually, HOA disputes are just people arguing about paint colors or lawn height. I've never seen anyone actually stealing property before. She really thought she was in the right, I said. That's what gets me. She genuinely believed her position as president gave her the authority to do this. Power goes to people's heads sometimes, especially when it's small power. Hope you get your house sealed up okay. I drove home with my materials finally and spent the rest of the afternoon beginning the installation process. The weather stripping was high-quality silicone, designed to last for years in the Arizona heat. I worked methodically, measuring and cutting, fitting the pieces around my doors and windows. The physical work was satisfying after the morning's chaos. My phone rang around 6. It was Jennifer, the vice president of the HOA board. I had met her a few times at community meetings. She was reasonable, soft-spoken, the opposite of Deborah in every way. "Harold, I just heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I had no idea Deborah was doing anything like this." "It's not your fault, Jennifer, but the HOA board might want to issue some kind of statement. A lot of people are pretty upset. We're calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. Can you come? I think people need to hear directly from someone who was affected, and you're the one who finally caught her." "I'll be there." The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that usually hosted book clubs and yoga classes. When I arrived at 7 the next evening, the parking lot was completely full. People had parked on the street and were walking in from blocks away. Apparently, the entire neighborhood wanted to hear about Deborah's downfall. Inside, every chair was taken and people lined the walls. Jennifer sat at a table in front with the other board members, looking overwhelmed. She spotted me and waved me over to a reserved seat in the front row. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "This is going to be intense." She was right. The moment she called the meeting to order, hands shot up all over the room. People were angry, not just about the theft, but about years of Deborah's aggressive enforcement tactics. Story after story emerged about excessive fines, threatening letters, and petty violations that had made people's lives difficult. One elderly man stood up, his voice shaking with emotion. "She fined me $200 because my grass was half an inch too tall. Half an inch. I'm on a fixed income. That money was supposed to go toward my medications." A young mother described how Deborah had threatened to fine her $1,000 because her kids drew on the driveway with sidewalk chalk. She said it was defacing HOA property. It was chalk. It washes away with water. The stories went on for over an hour. Jennifer took notes, her expression growing more troubled with each account. When there was finally a break in the testimonials, she cleared her throat. "I want to start by apologizing on behalf of the board. We knew Deborah was strict, but we didn't realize the extent of what she was doing. Several of you have asked what happens now. First, Deborah has been removed from her position as president, effective immediately. Second, we're going to conduct a full review of every fine and violation she issued in the past year. If any were inappropriate or excessive, we'll refund them." Applause broke out across the room. Jennifer waited for it to die down before continuing. "Third, we're going to rewrite our enforcement procedures to include checks and balances. No single person should have this much authority again. And finally, we want to hear from Harold Reeves, who discovered what was happening and got the police involved." All eyes turned to me. I hadn't prepared a speech, but I stood up and faced the crowd. "I got lucky," I said. "I had a doorbell camera and a receipt, but the bigger issue is that we gave someone power and didn't question how they used it. Deborah got away with this for months because we assumed she knew what she was doing. We need to stay involved and hold our leaders accountable, whether it's the HOA board or any other organization we're part of." More applause. Jennifer thanked me and opened the floor to questions about the new enforcement procedures. The meeting lasted another hour, but it was productive. People proposed ideas, voted on interim leadership, and generally seemed optimistic about moving forward. As I was leaving, an older woman approached me. She introduced herself as Martha, and I recognized her from a few houses down from mine. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said. "Deborah took my husband's toolbox last month. He passed away 3 years ago, and that toolbox was one of the few things I had left that reminded me of him. She said it was a violation because it was visible through our garage window. I thought it was gone forever, but the police found it in her garage today. They're returning it tomorrow." I felt a lump in my throat. "I'm glad you're getting it back. I'm sorry she put you through that." People like Deborah forget that rules are supposed to help communities, not hurt them. You reminded everyone of that. Thank you. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Deborah was formally charged with multiple counts of theft and one count of abuse of authority. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had genuinely believed she was acting within her HOA authority, but the evidence was overwhelming. She had kept detailed records of everything she confiscated, including notes about which residents had complained and which had simply given up. The prosecution offered her a plea deal: plead guilty to theft charges, pay restitution to all affected residents, perform 200 hours of community service, and resign from any HOA position permanently. She took it, probably realizing that a trial would be even more humiliating. I received a check for $400 from the restitution fund, along with a formal apology letter that had clearly been written by her attorney. The letter said nothing about why she did it, or whether she understood what she had done wrong. It was just legal boilerplate, protecting her from further liability. The HOA board, under Jennifer's leadership, made good on their promises. They hired an independent firm to review all of Deborah's enforcement actions from the previous 18 months. Out of over 300 violations she had issued, nearly half were found to be either excessive or completely invalid. The board refunded over $15,000 in fines to residents. They also rewrote the bylaws to create a formal appeals process and limit the president's authority. Any confiscation of property was explicitly prohibited. Violations would be documented with photos and written warnings, with clear timelines for resolution. Fines would be reviewed by the full board before being assessed. I finished installing my weather sealing over the course of a week, working in the mornings before the Arizona heat became unbearable. The house felt noticeably cooler once I was done, and my air conditioning bills dropped by almost 30%. $400 well spent, even with all the drama it had caused. Tom and I became better friends through the whole ordeal. We started having beers on his back patio once a week, trading stories about neighborhood gossip and keeping an eye on how the new HOA board was handling things. "You ever think about running for the board?" he asked one evening in May, about 6 weeks after the incident. "God, no. After everything with Deborah, I want nothing to do with HOA politics. But you'd be good at it. You're level-headed, you actually read the bylaws, and people respect you for standing up to her. There are plenty of other people who can do it. Jennifer's doing a great job. Let her keep the position." "Fair enough. But if they ever need someone, I'm nominating you." I laughed it off, but Tom's words stayed with me. I had never thought of myself as particularly civic-minded. I paid my HOA dues, attended maybe one meeting a year, and generally kept to myself. But the situation with Deborah had shown me how quickly things could go wrong when good people checked out and let petty tyrants take over. The criminal case wrapped up in July. Deborah pleaded guilty in a brief court hearing that I attended, along with about a dozen other affected residents. The judge seemed genuinely baffled by the case. "Miss Patterson, I've been on the bench for 18 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this," he said during sentencing. "You systematically stole from your neighbors, people who trusted you to lead their community. You violated that trust in the most fundamental way. While I'm accepting the plea agreement, I want to be clear that this behavior was serious and harmful. You'll be on probation for 3 years, during which time you are prohibited from serving in any HOA leadership position anywhere in Arizona. If you violate the terms of your probation, including completing your community service hours, you'll serve 6 months in county jail. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Deborah said quietly. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The imperious attitude was completely gone. The judge signed the order and dismissed court. As I was leaving, I saw Deborah in the hallway with her lawyer. She glanced at me, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she just looked away and walked toward the exit. I felt a weird mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but sadness that it had come to this at all. Deborah had let a small amount of power corrupt her completely, and now her reputation was destroyed. She would be forever known in Desert Vista as the HOA president who stole from her neighbors. Life moved on. Summer arrived in full force, with temperatures regularly hitting 115 degrees. My weather sealing performed perfectly, keeping the cool air inside and the scorching heat outside. I ran into various neighbors at the grocery store or community pool, and the conversation inevitably turned to the HOA situation. Most people were pleased with how Jennifer was handling things. She had created a monthly newsletter to keep residents informed about board decisions. She held open office hours where anyone could drop by and ask questions. She even started a neighborhood watch program that actually brought people together instead of turning them into enforcement agents. The whole experience taught me something important about community governance. HOA, at their best, can maintain property values and create standards that everyone agrees on, but they require active participation and oversight. When residents check out and let one person run things unchecked, you get situations like we had with Deborah. I started attending HOA meetings regularly after that, not because I wanted to get involved in politics, but because I wanted to make sure nothing like that happened again. I asked questions, reviewed financial reports, and generally stayed informed. Other residents did the same. Attendance at monthly meetings went from maybe 10 people before to consistently over 50 afterward. Tom did end up nominating me for the board in September. I declined, but I appreciated the gesture. Instead, I volunteered to chair a new enforcement oversight committee. The committee's job was to review any violations before fines were assessed and ensure everything was handled fairly. It was boring work, mostly reviewing photos of slightly overgrown hedges or paint colors that were allegedly non-compliant, but it was important. In October, I was reviewing violation reports when I came across a case that gave me pause. A resident named Patricia had been cited because her Halloween decorations were too elaborate. The complaint had come from her next-door neighbor, who apparently objected to the inflatable ghost on her lawn. I looked at the photos. The decorations were festive but not excessive. Nothing in our bylaws prohibited holiday decorations. I marked the violation as invalid and sent an email to Jennifer explaining why. She called me within an hour. "Thank you for catching that." I almost approved it without looking closely. The ghost seemed fine to me, but I wasn't sure if there was some rule I was missing. There's not. Someone just doesn't like their neighbor's decorations. That's not an HOA issue. Agreed. I'll send Patricia a letter letting her know the complaint was dismissed. And Harold, thank you for doing this. I know it's not glamorous work, but it matters. No problem. Better to spend an hour reviewing photos than deal with another Deborah situation. Jennifer laughed. Fair point. As Halloween approached, Patricia's decorations got even more elaborate. She added a skeleton band, more inflatables, and string lights. It looked great, honestly. I took my nephew trick-or-treating in the neighborhood on Halloween night, and Patricia's house was the most popular stop. She had full-size candy bars and seemed genuinely delighted by all the attention. Her neighbor, the one who had complained, had a single pumpkin on his porch and his lights off. Some people just couldn't stand to see others having fun. November brought cooler weather and a sense of renewal in Desert Vista. The community felt different now, more engaged and connected. People looked out for each other instead of reporting each other. The HOA was functioning the way it was supposed to, maintaining standards without being oppressive. I thought about Deborah occasionally, wondering how she was doing. I had heard through the grapevine that she and her husband were selling their house and moving to a different part of Phoenix, probably for the best. There was no way she could stay in Desert Vista after everything that had happened. Part of me felt bad for her. She had let her need for control destroy her life in this community. But she had also hurt a lot of people, and some of those wounds went deep. Martha still got emotional when she talked about almost losing her late husband's toolbox. The young mother, whose kids had been threatened over sidewalk chalk, had developed anxiety about letting them play outside. Those weren't things you could fix with a plea deal and restitution checks. In December, the HOA held a holiday party at the community center. It was the first social event since the spring incident, and the turnout was impressive. People brought food, kids ran around playing, and there was a genuine sense of community spirit. Jennifer gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition. This year has been challenging, but it's also shown what this neighborhood can be when we work together. Here's to a better year ahead. Everyone raised their glasses. Tom nudged me and grinned. You're a hero, man. None of this would have happened if you hadn't stood up to her. I just wanted my weather sealing back, I said, but I was smiling too. The truth was more complicated than that. I had wanted my property back, yes, but I had also been fed up with Deborah's behavior for years. The theft was just the final straw, the thing that pushed me to actually do something instead of just complaining to neighbors. Standing up to her had been intimidating. She was established in the community, confident in her authority, and completely convinced she was right. But she wasn't right, and sometimes you have to call out wrong behavior even when it's uncomfortable. As the party wound down and people started heading home, I helped clean up. Patricia, the woman with the Halloween decorations, came over with a plate of cookies. "These are for you," she said. "Jennifer told me you're the one who dismissed that ridiculous complaint about my decorations. I really appreciate it. Just doing my job. Your decorations were great, by the way. My nephew loved them. I'm doing even more for Christmas. If anyone complains, send them to me." "I'm done being intimidated by grumpy neighbors," I laughed. "I don't think you'll have any problems. The board's a lot more reasonable now." She smiled and headed out. Tom appeared at my elbow with 2 beers. "Last one's in the cooler. Want to sit outside for a bit?" We sat on the community center's back patio, looking out over the desert landscape. The temperature was perfect, mid-60s with a slight breeze. These were the nights that made living in Phoenix worthwhile. "You ever wonder why she did it?" Tom asked after a while. "Deborah." "I think she convinced herself that being strict was the same as being effective. Like, if she could just control every little detail, the neighborhood would be perfect. But you can't control people like that. You can only drive them crazy." Think she learned anything from all this? I thought about it. I hope so. But honestly, I doubt it. People like that rarely see themselves as the problem. She probably thinks we're all ungrateful and that she was doing us a favor. That's depressing. Yeah, but it's also a good reminder for the rest of us. Power corrupts, even tiny amounts of power like being HOA president. We have to stay vigilant. Tom clinked his beer against mine. To vigilance, then, and to weather-sealing materials that stay where you put them. I'll drink to that. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The whole ordeal felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. But I knew I wouldn't forget the lessons I had learned. In January, I was replacing my mailbox, which had been damaged in a minor fender bender when someone backed into it. I was measuring and marking where the new post would go when a moving truck pulled up to Deborah's old house. A young couple got out, looking excited and slightly overwhelmed. I walked over and introduced myself. Their names were Jason and Emma, and they were first-time homebuyers. "Welcome to Desert Vista," I said. "I'm Harold. I live a few streets over. If you need anything or have questions about the neighborhood, feel free to ask." "Thank you," Emma said warmly. "Everyone has been so nice." The HOA president already dropped off a welcome packet with all the community information. "That's great. Jennifer's really good about that." "We were a little nervous about buying in an HOA," Jason admitted. "We heard some horror stories about strict rules and crazy fines. But Jennifer said things are pretty relaxed here." "They are now," I said. "The previous president was pretty intense, but she's gone. The current board is much more reasonable. Just follow the basic rules, don't paint your house neon pink, and you'll be fine." They laughed, and we chatted for a few more minutes before I headed back to my mailbox project. It felt good to welcome new neighbors without having to warn them about Deborah's enforcement tactics. The neighborhood really had turned a corner. February marked 1 year since I had bought the weather sealing materials. I did a walkthrough of my house, checking all the seals and making minor adjustments where needed. Everything was holding up perfectly. The house stayed cool in summer and warm in winter, and my energy bills had stayed low. It was funny how such a simple home improvement project had ended up changing the entire neighborhood. If Deborah hadn't stolen my materials, if I hadn't had a doorbell camera, if I had just let it go and bought new supplies, she might still be running the HOA like her personal kingdom. Sometimes small acts of resistance matter more than we realize. In March, I was elected to the HOA board despite my earlier reluctance. 2 board members had resigned due to work commitments, and multiple people had asked me to run. I figured I had earned some credibility through the oversight committee work, so I agreed. The board meetings were nothing like what they had been under Deborah. We discussed actual issues, sought input from residents, and made decisions collaboratively. It was boring in the best possible way. No drama, no power trips, just competent governance. We dealt with things like pool maintenance schedules, landscaping bids for common areas, and whether to upgrade the community center's air conditioning. Important but mundane stuff that actually affected people's daily lives. During one meeting in April, Jennifer brought up the idea of creating a community garden on a vacant lot near the entrance. Several residents have expressed interest, and we have the budget for it. We could create individual plots that people could rent for a small annual fee. It would be a nice amenity and bring people together. The board voted unanimously in favor. 2 months later, the garden was installed with 20 plots available for rent. They were all claimed within a week. I signed up for one myself, even though I had never gardened before. Tom took the plot next to mine, and we spent Saturday mornings learning together, trading advice with more experienced gardeners. It was exactly the kind of thing that made an HOA valuable. We pooled resources to create something none of us could have done individually, and it strengthened community bonds. This was what Deborah had never understood. Rules and enforcement were just tools, not the goal. The actual goal was making Desert Vista a place where people wanted to live. By summer, my garden was producing tomatoes, peppers, and more zucchini than I knew what to do with. I started bringing vegetables to board meetings and sending people home with bags of produce. Other gardeners did the same, and an informal exchange network developed. Someone would post in the neighborhood Facebook group that they had excess cucumbers, and someone else would offer to trade for their surplus beans. Small things, but they mattered. They created connections between people who might otherwise never have spoken. In August, almost exactly 18 months after the theft incident, I ran into Deborah at a grocery store across town. I almost didn't recognize her. She had changed her hair, dyed it darker, and looked older somehow. She was alone, studying a display of cereal like it was the most important decision she'd ever make. I debated whether to say anything. Part of me wanted to just slip past and avoid any awkwardness, but another part felt like we had unfinished business. "Deborah," I said quietly. She looked up and I saw recognition and something like fear flash across her face. "Harold, hi." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Other shoppers flowed around us, oblivious. "How have you been?" I asked, because what else do you say? "Fine." "Good. We moved to Scottsdale. My husband got a new job, so fresh start." She wasn't meeting my eyes. "That's good." Another pause. Then she said very quietly, "I'm sorry for what I did. I know the court made me apologize, but I am actually sorry. I thought I was helping the neighborhood, but I see now that I went too far." I studied her face, trying to determine if she meant it. She seemed sincere, but it was hard to tell. "I appreciate you saying that. It hurt a lot of people what you did." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I've been seeing a therapist, trying to figure out why I thought any of that was okay. Apparently I have some control issues." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy. She looked genuinely miserable. "I hope the therapy helps," I said and meant it. "Take care of yourself, Deborah. You too." I walked away, leaving her standing by the cereal. I felt oddly lighter, like something had been resolved that I didn't know needed resolving. Maybe she had learned something after all, or maybe she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. When I got home, I called Tom and told him about the encounter. "Weird," he said. "Do you believe her that she's sorry?" "I think she's sorry she got caught and charged with crimes. Whether she's sorry for actually doing it, I don't know. But it doesn't matter, she's not our problem anymore." "True. Hey, are you coming to the HOA barbecue on Saturday? Jennifer's trying to get a head count." "Yeah, I'll be there. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself and your famous garden zucchini." The barbecue was a huge success. Over 100 residents showed up, including Jason and Emma, the couple who had bought Deborah's house. They had integrated into the neighborhood beautifully, attending meetings and volunteering for various committees. As I stood there, watching kids run around playing tag while adults chatted and laughed, I thought about how much had changed in less than 2 years. A small act of theft had exposed systemic problems, which had led to real reforms, which had created this vibrant, engaged community. Jennifer came up beside me, holding a plate of food. "This is nice. I'm really proud of what we've built here. You should be. You've done a great job as president. I had help. You and the rest of the board made it possible. And honestly, the whole neighborhood deserves credit. People stayed involved and held us accountable. That's what makes the difference." She was right. The real lesson from the Deborah situation wasn't just that one person could abuse power. It was that communities got the leadership they demanded. When people checked out and let others run things unchecked, you got tyrants. When people stayed engaged and participated, you got effective governance. It was a lesson that applied far beyond HOAs. Politics at every level worked the same way. Democracy required effort from everyone, not just the people in charge. As the sun set over the desert and the barbecue wound down, I helped clean up and said my goodbyes. Walking back to my house, I passed by my front porch where the weather sealing materials had been stolen almost 2 years earlier. The seals I had installed were still working perfectly, keeping my home comfortable and energy efficient. $400 and one stolen delivery had changed everything. Not because the money mattered that much, or even because the theft was so serious. but because it had been the catalyst that forced the neighborhood to confront systemic problems we had all been ignoring. Sometimes you need a crisis to create change. The trick is making sure the change actually sticks. I settled into my living room that evening, enjoying the cool air that my weather ceiling helped maintain. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Great barbecue. Your zucchini was a hit. Garden tomorrow morning. See you there," I replied. Life in Desert Vista had found a comfortable rhythm. The HOA handled necessary governance without being oppressive. Neighbors looked out for each other. People participated in community activities and stayed informed about decisions that affected them. It was everything an HOA was supposed to be, and it had taken a theft and criminal charges to get there. Not the path anyone would have chosen, but sometimes you don't get to choose the path. You just have to walk it and make the best of where it leads. As I sat there in my perfectly sealed, comfortably cool house, I felt genuinely grateful for how everything had turned out. Grateful that I had stood up to Deborah. Grateful for neighbors like Tom who had my back. Grateful for leaders like Jennifer who actually cared about doing the job right. And grateful for doorbell cameras and Home Depot receipts, which had made it possible to prove the truth when someone tried to gaslight me into accepting theft as legitimate enforcement. The weather sealing materials, those 6 boxes of silicone strips, had been more than just a home improvement purchase. They had been a test of whether I would accept injustice or fight back. A test of whether the community would support accountability or maintain the status quo. We had passed that test collectively, and Desert Vista was better for it. I went to bed that night feeling content, knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up, tend my garden, maybe work on another home project, and continue living in a community that finally functioned the way it should. All because I had refused to let someone steal my property and get away with it. All because I had receipts to prove ownership and the will to use them.